Right. Hello, everybody. Hello. I normally don't like to say good evening because other places it could be other countries it could be afternoon, it could be morning, it could be evening. So I normally say hello. Welcome to A2I Dyslexia live show. Wherever you're watching from, whichever country you're watching from, we'd like to welcome you. Today's show is about a mother and son's journey with dyslexia. And we are so happy and privileged and exciting to have Lois and her son Nicholas, who have joined us from, you have to remind me where you've joined us from. I know you told me already. Is it in America, isn't it? Is it Houston?
I'm in upstate New York, 250 miles north of New York City.
Right, okay. And Nicholas, you're in Oxford, are you? No, you're not. You're in London.
No, that's correct. I live in Oxford.
You live in Oxford, wonderful. And you see what technology can do. It's so amazing to have your mother who's in New York, you're in Oxford, and I'm in Wimbledon, and it's all working. It's just so amazing to have such a beautiful platform to talk about both your journeys with dyslexia. Welcome everybody who's joined us now. If you're sitting there wondering, oh, what do I do? All you need to do is sit with a cup of tea, cup of coffee, whatever tickles your fancy, a glass of water, I wouldn't mention a glass of wine, and just enjoy the show because it's really going to be a phenomenal show today. I don't normally like to say this evening, depending on where you're watching from. So welcome to the show, Lois. Is it Letchford? Is how you pronounce your surname? Yeah. And welcome to the show, Nicholas. We feel so honored to have you this evening because you've got an amazing story, both of you. So, Lois, if I can come to you first, if you can introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us a little bit about your background. But before you do that, I'd like to tell our viewers to share the live show with their friends and families and colleagues, because if you're not dyslexic, you might know someone who is. And I think this story, particularly today, will really motivate the individual to really unlock their full potential. And moving on from that, Lois, I'd like to hand it over to you now to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm delighted to be here. I am now the author of the book called Reverse to Memoir. I am a reading specialist, a reading teacher, and I speak about dyslexia and overcoming learning disabilities. So it's been a long journey, but an incredible journey, and one that has made me passionate about teaching children to read. End of story. It just must teach children to read.
Wonderful. But you're dyslexic yourself, aren't you, Lois? You've actually got dyslexia. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah? Yes, I am.
When was that diagnosed? How old was you when that was diagnosed, if you don't mind me asking? Yeah.
Never. Never. Mm-hmm. And my mother was 70 years old when I was working with Nicholas, and she said to me, Lois, I needed help like you were giving Nicholas.
Wow.
And it was the first time she had acknowledged the struggles she had with reading.
Right. So you and I know that dyslexia is genetic. We know that because of, according to research. Not many people know that. I mean, where A2I Dyslexia, we get parents come in and say, look, my child's got dyslexia. I don't know where they got it from. We're such a bright, clever family. We don't know where that child got it from. And I think I'm saying, well, actually, go back history and you might know that maybe your mother or grandparents may have got dyslexia, hence why your children might have that now. I think it's really important that I highlight on that, because some parents say, I don't know where he or she got it from because I'm clever. And I normally say, well, we're all clever. Dyslexics are so intelligent, it's unbelievable. It's just our brains work differently. Thank you for that introduction. I would now like to move on to Nicholas, just to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his, just what he does and who he is. So Nicholas, over to you now.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's really good to talk to you. My name, just call me Nick. I have a DPhil in mathematics from the University of Oxford. I also have a background in mechanical engineering and health economics through a master's and undergraduate in different continents. Currently, I am an assistant consultant at at an international development consultancy based in Oxford called Oxford Policy Management, where I work on. I've contributed to a variety of different projects. Most recently, modelling the burden of COVID-19 in different contexts across 2 continents at the moment so far. So it's an exciting time.
Right. Now, you're not just Nick, you're Dr. Nicholas, aren't you? You're not just Nick. I like that. And your journey from when you were a child to becoming a doctor is absolutely phenomenal. And I just really wanted to hammer on that and say that it's Dr. Nicholas Letchford. I know Nick said, I'm just Nick, but he's not just Nick. He is more than Nick. Please. We just thought I'd get that right. Yeah. And of course, to become a doctor was not as simple as that. And I wanted your mother to kind of tell me a little bit about your childhood, because she was there and saw it all. And then you can continue from where you noticed that you have dyslexia. So Lois, let me ask you the first question. Tell me about Nicholas growing up with dyslexia. What was your reaction when you found out that your son got dyslexia? What was your reaction to that?
Well, the reaction comes before you even have the diagnosis. There's an acknowledgement that something wasn't right and that he really struggled with comprehension of language. He was very good at puzzles and building, but he was very slow with his speech. And what I didn't know was that when he was 8 to 18 months, he had constant ear infections. And that really impacts brain development and particularly language development. And it impacts the child's understanding and comprehension of language significantly. People don't tell you, and then you're left with it. So I knew something wasn't right, and in preschool, the teacher said he's okay, he's fine, he'll be all right. It was when he went to first grade, he absolutely failed, that he stared into space, he wet his pants, he bit his fingernails, and the teacher shouted at him. And he was terrified, absolutely terrified every single day. And at the end of the year, then you get testing done, and the testing shows, well, he can't read anything. He can read 10 words. He's got no strengths, and he's got a low IQ. And that's when, you're hit with the whammy, now what do I do? Because the prognosis now is dire.
So did you know anything about dyslexia before your son was diagnosed, or you
were right? Told? No, I didn't. But it's interesting you say that, because although I wasn't diagnosed, I remember hearing something on the radio saying some people are really smart, but they struggle with reading. And that stuck in my mind, because I could read and I could read words, but I couldn't comprehend. When I was a child, I specifically remember not being able to comprehend and how frustrating that was. But because I could read words, no one cared.
Right. So, Nicholas' teacher many years ago said he was the worst child he had ever seen at the age of 7, and probably thought, what do we do with this child? How did you feel when such words were said to you from a teacher? What were your reaction? Did you ever think, is it something I ate during pregnancy? Did you ever think, what have I done as a mother? You couldn't have comprehended with it at that time. But when the teacher said that, did you kind of say to yourself, well, actually, we're going to prove you wrong and one day he's going to be a doctor?
I didn't have that strength of belief. I wish I'd had. But it's interesting, the scenario that happened to lead up to that point. I had worked with Nicholas one-to-one when we were away. And I went from disaster to teaching is so exciting. And during that time, I wrote poems for Nicholas, and we ended up doing an inquiry project. And through that, I could see Nicholas had this incredible brain. He took a long time to get a thought from up here through his mouth. But once he got that through his mouth, there was a recognition, hey, this kid really does some incredible thinking skills. Yeah. So that's what happened. And then I went back to this lady who'd done the testing, and I said, Nicholas has asked these amazing questions. And that's what she said. Really, she was saying, that's not possible.
Right.
And in fact, he's the worst kid ever. And the reading teacher said he's gone backwards.
Wow.
And what it did for me was really made me rethink. And I took a little bit of time to stew over what was being said, but I said to her, you can call him whatever you like.
Yeah.
But if he is the worst child you've seen in 20 years of teaching, don't expect him to learn like everyone else. And
Exactly.
that's really what drove me. And from there on, I changed the teaching at home. He went to school, and if he didn't understand something, I made sure he did at home. And the problem, one of the problems is that words are abstract, and I made them concrete. And I made learning so much fun for Nicholas. And that's what drove me across the board. Teach the child to read, make learning fun.
Right. And of course, you then decided, look, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to become a literacy problem solver, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I went back to the textbooks, and I was astonished at the amount of information that was there. But also, you know, when you're reading textbooks, you don't come without knowledge. I came with my background and Nicholas's background, and what was in the textbooks just amazed me. And it really helped me put my philosophy into words and to articulate, this is what happened, this is what we have to do.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Honestly, I kept saying to the viewers today, today's show, and sometimes I get quite emotional when I hear Nicola's story, because we get a lot of parents come to us with not as severe as maybe Nicholas's journey, but it's so motivating to hear this, because I just want all parents to know that having dyslexia, there is definitely some success that come out of our story, even from a young age. So, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. But I just want to go to Nicholas now and ask Nicholas what it was like for him growing up with dyslexia from childhood. What was it like for you, Nicholas? Mum said a little bit, and maybe that's the part you may not have remembered. But from when you can remember, what was it like for you growing up?
That's a very good question. Thank you. To be honest, there's not much I can really remember from growing up. I can remember certain small things, like primarily being very different to a lot of people. But I also internalized that, I think, very early, in that from the earliest I can remember, I've generally just accepted that I've been very different from everyone else, and that I'm quite okay with that. And more to the point, that I have no problem with being different. I have no problem with my own company, and that I'm quite acceptable of that fact. I think that's probably one of it's something that's really important, is to just be very accepting of yourself and what your own limitations are, but also the strengths that you have.
So I said, I mean, what age can you remember to do with schooling? What kind of age can you remember? Maybe secondary? Can you remember secondary school, or maybe not?
I can remember going to the UK. I remember doing lots of poems with Mum, and going to the British Museum, going to like the Pitt Rivers in Oxford, and the Apollion every now and again. I remember, the UK was a big place. Particularly at the time, I think I was fascinated with all the castles here. As a 7-year-old boy, that was like probably the most exciting thing.
Boy, heaven.
As the maps in the British Museum and the British Library really excited me. I remember believing or having the opinion that when I was 5 or 6 or 10, whenever it was, that the English language was logical and sensible, and so that there can only be one word per meaning and one meaning per word, because any alternative doesn't make any sense. And
I'm laughing. I'm laughing because I've just seen John Hicks online and his elephant pee. I'm not too sure what he means by that, but it's quite hilarious. But carry on. Yeah. We just
and I believe that that was the word of God until I was about 10 or whenever it was that I realized that isn't necessarily the case. The English language is not quite so logical, and I think at that point I must have went on a campaign to convert the rest of the English-speaking world to being like me, which I'm still going on in that direction. But yeah.
But because one of your strengths is maths, isn't it? You're really good with like figures and maths and statistics and things like that. That's one of your strengths, isn't it? Rather than maybe what?
So math is I don't think I was always good at math. I think Mum will probably tell you that I couldn't do anything until I was about 12 or 13, whenever. But maths is basically the trick to solving mathematical problems is to visualize it. And if you can visualize the solution, then you've got 70% of the work done, probably. I feel that visualizing work and analysis.
The last time we spoke, just before we came, I think it was about a month ago, we spoke, and I think we were talking about your studies. I think your finals with your PhD at university, and I think you were saying that it was one of the most difficult things you had to do, isn't it?
Yes, it was.
That
was actually a really difficult thing for me. I thought writing it was difficult, but the actual viva was near impossible. But I passed, so it's good.
That's what I normally say. No matter how difficult it is, I think a lot of dyslexics I've met in the past, no matter how tough or difficult it may be, we see it through to the end, because we don't want to walk away from it. We'll keep going until we see it through to the end. And I think just before the show started, I said to you that DR, doctor, I'd love to have that at the beginning of my name. And I know it's going to be a huge struggle, but I think I'm working on it slowly. Slowly but gradually we'll get there. So if I just thank you for that, Nicholas. I'm going to move on to Lois now, your mum, and ask her a few more questions about obviously why she became an author, and why did you call your company Literacy Problem Solver? There must be a reason why you did that. Just tell me a bit more about that.
So which one do you want first?
Both. Well, either one. Either one.
Nicholas, when he was in elementary school, looked like the prognosis was he was not going to go nowhere. And once he learned to read, you could see he could do things. But his journey just got better and better and better. Nicholas was not privileged. Nicholas was extremely privileged to learn to read and succeed. And that's what drove me. And once we got through the reading, then you got to go from the bottom to the top. And we actually moved continents, not for Nicholas, but with his father's job.
Right. So when you say, let me just stop you there 1 minute. When you say extremely privileged, how do you mean? Is that because you were constantly at it, or because you could afford to do the assessment, or how do you mean? If you just explain that to me.
Extremely privileged in that when Nicholas was 7, my husband is a professor.
Oh, right. Okay.
We moved to Oxford for 6 months for him to do study leave. And when we were in Oxford is when I realised Nicholas is not stupid. Nicholas can do things. So it was actually moving continents that allowed me to teach Nicholas and do anything. And to experience through a whole range of things is why Nicholas learned to read. Very few people have that option. And if we had stayed in Australia, the focus would have been on decoding. He couldn't have done it, and they would have said, well, your child can't do it, and this is the IQ score, and stop expecting it. But to get away from that system, to get away from all of those preconceived ideas is what changed Nicholas's life. And then, when he was 11, he's reading on a 3rd grade reading level, and he's in the 5th grade. So there's a gap. Everyone is delighted with what Nicholas has achieved. In fact, he's exceeded expectations.
Right.
We then moved from Australia to the US, again, following my husband's job. And you see a Nicholas that was disciplined, that could read, 2 hours a night, 5 and 6 nights a week consistently. And you've got this change that happened that would not have happened if we'd stayed in Australia.
Right.
And it all happened through circumstances. And it taught me how much mindset plays a role in what we can expect of these children. And so much happened in Lubbock, Texas. That's where Nicholas went from the bottom to the top. And one of the, you've got to find Lubbock on a map, but Lubbock is about 600 miles from the next town. We drove for miles. When we were driving, we listened to books on CD.
Wow.
If you have a problem with language, and Nicholas had a language problem, how do you get better? You've got to be hearing the words of the best readers. And that's what happened to Nicholas. That was not offered in Australia. It wasn't suggested. There weren't books on CD available. But someone has to put that into your mind. Listen to books on CD.
Is that the sort of advice you would give parents? Definitely.
Definitely. Listen, and re-listen. Nicholas would listen to the same book 2 or 3 times. And it gave him story structure. It gave him vocabulary. It gave him knowledge of his peers. Right. And all of that helped him go from the bottom to the top.
That's just
background
amazing.
Knowledge, the whole range of stuff that critical to his development. Because Nicholas was not only reading 2 hours a night, but he was taking 1 week to read 1 book. And if you break that down, that's 5 minutes a page of goosebumps that he was reading. So that your growth and your progress can only be at a snail's pace.
Right. So let me just ask a question now. Why do you think dyslexia is not well recognized in Australia? Is that why nothing was really done? And obviously when you came to the UK is when you were saying, look, that's where he had the breakthrough. So in Australia, is dyslexia not something that's recognized, or no one really sees it as a big problem? Or not a problem, but, something that someone needs help for? No?
It wasn't a dyslexia. It was a specific, I can't even say the word, specific learning disability.
Yeah.
That makes me say something really nasty, because the word says learning disability. He doesn't have a learning disability. He has a language problem.
Right.
So the name doesn't even identify. And the moment you've put the learning, it says this child cannot learn. That's a lie. He struggles with learning letters and sounds. He struggles with memory of words.
Right.
John asked Nicholas a question.
Yeah, John's asked Nicholas a question, which I think is really important, because I'm still struggling with self-esteem, even running this organization and everything else. So John's question is, could Nicholas share something about his experience of developing his self-esteem, considering the difficulties he had in school? Nicholas, would you be able to share that with us, your self-esteem?
Yeah.
I know loads of children.
I'm curious to know, which phase in my education you're referring to, because I would say that I've gone through peaks and troughs of my self-esteem, depending on where I was and stuff, I guess. During my DPhil, I had fairly low self-esteem, and I think actually even after my DPhil, I had none. Ironically, after having completed a PhD at Oxford, I didn't really actually have much self-esteem, which is very curious. It's fairly unusual, but it was only actually after doing a master's that I developed that within me. And I probably, at that point, I realized that I may not have known everything, but I had the skills to be able to teach me to learn everything, which was not something I had at the, I had the skills, but I didn't realize I had the skills at the end of my PhD. And I think that was a learning process for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you remember anything to do with your self-esteem when you were younger? Let's say age of 16 upwards. How did you deal with that?
I was really good at calculus and the math classes. I wasn't so interested in English. I didn't really have any self-esteem problems in high school, as far as I can remember, or in my undergraduate. I think I was fairly confident in most classes. I did engineering, which I didn't really like, but I still had quite a high like self-esteem at that point. I think it was when I came to Oxford that I had like an imposter syndrome, and that plummeted.
Yes.
But I've got it now. Like, ironically, after having done a master's, I realized that I've done more complicated things in my past, and anything that comes up is something I'm confident I can learn. It might take me a week or a month or several months to figure it out, depending on the complexity. I'm well confident that it's something that I can learn.
One of the things that really helped Nicholas, particularly in elementary school and when we came to the US, was building with Connects. And you talk about that.
Well, there's not much, I don't know if there's much I can really say because I can't remember too much, but I would as typical of lots of mathematicians, you have a high spatial awareness and a high visualization sort of ability to visualize problems. And basically that means that it's like, that's the first step in mathematics, is to visualize a problem and then visualize the solution. And so I don't know if you're familiar with Connects, but it's like a construction toy similar to Lego, but different. And it allowed me to develop those skills. And it was also like, I think I would spend probably 7, 8, or 9 hours on the weekend building a building or like a construction of something or a replica out of this construction toy Connects, which I thought was quite normal for that age.
So, Nicholas, what advice would you have for an 8, 9-year-old watching parents with their 8, 9, or 10-year-old, or a teenager watching this program right now, and maybe the mother or the parent or the father is struggling to get this child to engage in learning, and they may be watching now thinking, I want to be a doctor one day, or I want to do something really great. I mean, you're working at the moment, the modeling of COVID-19, which is just phenomenal. It's just so amazing. What advice would you have for that young person or a parent who's watching right now?
That's a really good question. For me, I would have to say, just don't encourage, not necessarily the learning, but maybe encourage it as a fun activity. I don't know how you do that. That's a good
that's mum. We'll ask mum how you do that in a minute.
Basically, like, somehow, I don't know how mum did this or something, but I somehow got into the habit of learning that I love the act of learning. And that's something that I have internalized and I've developed in myself to the point where, like, I've realized that learning doesn't stop after you've finished a PhD or after you've got a master's. It's a continuous, lifelong thing that I will do until I'm in a grave or something. And like, that is something that I will always do. And I'm always taking on projects using new methods, using new analyses, using new, attempting new problems. And it's almost gotten to the point where it's an addiction that I love to find new things that I don't know, find new problems that I don't know how to solve, and then figure out, okay, we can solve it this way. It's like, it's like a thing for me. And it's almost like as soon as I know how to solve the problem, or as soon as I have solved the problem, it's like, oh, now I'm bored. Like,
yeah. Wow. So when I said dyslexia are problem solvers, you'd 100% agree with that, wouldn't you? Because you see the bigger picture and you can literally say, well, actually, that's the solution to this problem, isn't it? And that's a skill in itself, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's part of the visualization thing is if you can visualize the problem and break it up into components and then just visualize the solution. In that, they often say, like, words are 1,000 pictures, but in mathematics, it's like, well, an equation is 1,000 pictures, and one picture is 1,000 words. So you can say so much more with a set of equations than you can with answers from that.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And Lois, just coming back to you with the same question that John asked. What was it like for Nicholas? Because Nicholas is saying he can't remember as far back as maybe primary school. But what was his self-esteem like at that time? For you as a mother, how did you feel? And how did you deal with it?
Yeah, in first grade, it was absolutely appalling. That was really terrible. But once we got, we'd been to Oxford and came back to school, he had some wonderful teachers. And Nicholas is very self-conscious of himself. And he wasn't going to be put down by anyone, but he was always quiet. But after that, he had some phenomenal teachers. And that really made a difference throughout his schooling. I mean, if you want a perfect child, Nicholas would have been the ideal child in school, even though he was lower at learning and slower at learning because he was so disciplined. And if you gave him a task, he did it. So, he didn't become a behavior problem, which is really quite surprising. So that's it was quite amazing watching him be so disciplined at whatever level he was at. And that's really what, I don't know how you instill that in a child, because our eldest son, who learns at the speed of light, drove us nuts because he learnt so quickly and he put no effort in, nothing mattered to him, whereas Nicholas was the opposite. So what do you do?
Wow, it's just so amazing, isn't it? Really, really amazing. I think we've already asked Lois, could you share something about his experience developing his self-esteem, considering he had difficulties in school? I think you've already kind of answered that for us. But
it's building on their strengths too, because the one thing I did, like Nicholas said, was building to his love of learning. You don't expect that, but then it comes to me as a literacy problem solver. That's my goal then, is not just to teach children to read, but to give them a love of learning while we're learning to read.
Yeah, because I think when we first came on the show, Marcia came on and she was saying, look, I'm dyslexic, her daughter's dyslexic, and her mother's dyslexic. So we know that dyslexia is genetic. But I think we are so blessed in a way that we can say, okay, I have dyslexia, my child's got dyslexia, and I'm going to help them to the best that I can. I mean, with pandemic and lockdowns and quarantine or whatever word you want to call it, can you imagine having dyslexia as a mother and then trying to teach your child at the same time? I know I'm struggling. My daughter isn't dyslexic, but I am. And she'll come with the maths and I can't really deal with that at the moment, but I have to still help her. So my brain is working 500 times more to make sure that her work is done properly. Yeah. And I just think, the two of you together writing this book, it's just so amazing. It's phenomenal. And I just want to say, if anybody's joined us right now, we are talking about a mother and son's journey with dyslexia. And we'd love you to share it, invite friends to watch. I think John came back on and asked the question and it's disappeared on me.
No, he was saying sharing a love of learning. John has read my book. Excellent. And he's the one who wrote about elephant pee. And what happened when I was teaching Nicholas was, to me, that teaching reading became so much fun. And it moved from just teaching the word letters and sounds, which is what people then focus on, which is the weakness of the child. And I found a way around it to make learning fun and have them laughing. Because when you're laughing and when you're emotionally involved in the learning, the pain goes away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. Let me just turn to Nicholas for a minute, because the last time we spoke, I think Nicholas spoke about having a really amazing one-to-one support, or a supervisor, I think is what he called, his supervisor that helped him with his studies at the PhD level. And I think Nicholas was saying if he hadn't have found the supervisor, it would have been double the trauma. so to say. So Nicholas, share that with us, if that's okay. I mean, I know someone might be watching right now and they may be doing their degree or master's or at college and thinking, I can't cope no more. What you said last time we spoke was so inspiring. If you'd like to share that with us, please. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Like in my there were various teachers throughout my education. In high school in Lubbock, Texas, I had some really amazing teachers who I was able to learn from, and they recognized the skills that I have and were able to capitalize on that. Again, in my undergraduate in Tasmania, I had a professor who the work that he gave me, I was just able to click with him. It was just so easy for me that I just really enjoyed it. It was more difficult when I came to Oxford for some reason. Again, I think it was partly due to the imposter syndrome that I found that very difficult. And I can only emphasize the importance of just having someone who can guide you and help you and assist you in that process.
And who believes in you, I guess, isn't it? Yeah.
That's
really important.
It's a really difficult thing to find, and I've come to the conclusion is when there's a good group of probably what's more important than the actual work is the people you work with. At the place I'm at now, at OPM, I've found a group of people who support me, and I've come to realize that is absolutely essential. That I really enjoy the work that I'm with now because the people I find are very supportive, and the environment that is not supportive, it's really tough.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've met so many people who, no matter where they work, and it's where the managers are not that supportive, or they having to struggle by themselves to get the work done, and that in itself can come with a huge problems for the individual. And I think, I mean, I was so lucky when I was at uni that I got amazing teachers that understood that I couldn't grasp what they were saying. Part of my dyslexia is memory retention. So everything that's been taught in class, I will come out of lectures and I can't remember a thing. So how was I ever going to pass? So it meant recording everything, coming and listening to it over and over and over and over again to be able to get that right. And I think Marcy's just dropped a message that being dyslexic and supporting my daughter who is dyslexic, accepting our learning difference, and having fun, being creative, a lot of laughter in our discovery of our dyslexia. That's really positive. Yeah. That's so positive, but it doesn't really work like that for everybody. I know some parents that are tearing their hair out and thinking, I can't do this. I can't cope with it. But when you hear positive stories like that, it's really, really amazing. So I'm going to go back to your mum now, to Lois, and I want you to tell me about the book, Reverse Memoir. John's read this book and he said, look, everybody should read it. And I started reading it and I thought I'd finish before we do the show actually, but I'm a very slow reader. So it will take me a little bit longer. And I think I agree with John. An amazing book. When I started reading, I thought, wow, every school needs to have a copy of your book on their shelf. Whether whether they've got dyslexic kids in the school or not, I think every parent should also purchase a copy because it's a true, real story coming from a mother who's dyslexic, a child who's dyslexic. So John's put, I just want to share how brilliant I thought Lois' book is. Such a joy in learning, and I think he's put some kind of website there, maybe A2I website or your website, whichever one it might be. And I agree with John. When I started reading, I didn't want to put it down. And I just wanted the whole world. I didn't want to put it down. And I was saying to myself, every school needs a copy of this book on their shelf, to be honest, because it's so amazing to see that your child would you say Nicholas has got severe dyslexia? Or would you say right?
He has a severe language disorder. His ability to recall language as a child, and even if you listen to Nicholas now, his speech is slower. It doesn't mean any more than his speech is slower because the brain is working at the same speed, 100 miles an hour. But in one of the videos, Nicholas talks about speaking English is like learning a foreign language. So there's a connection and a delay, but it doesn't mean any more than, he's got this problem. And he's, his thinking skills and the fact that he can do a PhD at Oxford still blows me away.
Absolutely. And this is why I think his story is so inspiring, because there's a lot of people that I can actually use this word. You can, if you're really willing to, you can. And I said to Nicholas before the show, I'm so motivated by his journey and his story that I think I'm going back into education to kind of further my studies, because
good on you.
It's possible. It's possible because and it's something I'd love to do. But I wanted you to share a little bit about your book, where people can purchase it, and if it's an ebook as well. And I know you support children who struggle to read, not necessarily dyslexic, but who struggle to read. And tell us a little bit about that as well. So first of all, tell me about the book. Where can we get it from?
You can get it on Amazon. I think you can order it through any bookshop, but it might take a little bit longer.
Right.
Yes, the writing of the book was interesting because writing is not my strong point. So I sat down and wrote it for 6 months. And of course it was terrible because the verb tenses don't match and everything was wrong. But I went to writing classes, and while I was there, I met a young girl who's about my son's age who said, Lois, I'll help you write it. And she transformed the book.
Excellent.
So I wrote for a year, and she would edit and then write and edit to make a book that people want to read. And that's really what made a huge difference.
And you know what, Lois? I think you should make a film out of this book. You should definitely get yourself a director and produce a film, because we need something like this.
They want me to pay for it, and I'm not doing that.
Well, if any filmmakers are watching right now, honestly, contact A2I Dyslexia or contact Lois. Contact details we'll put in a caption. And I definitely think there should be some kind of film out there to really sort of execute the amazing work you did as a mother, and the amazing work your son did as in learning to become a doctor and inspiring so many dyslexic across the world, if I can use that. So, Nicholas, what advice would you give a parent, a grandmother, a teacher, a head teacher, anybody that's watching right now? What advice would you give? I think particularly to parents. Yeah.
I would recommend just finding ways of encouraging, making learning a fun process that someone actually enjoys. I realize that that's easier said than done. And you probably need to take a specific approach to each person. But somehow it works for me, and I've had some really great success. And second is I would recognize people's strengths and what they're good at.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important, actually. There's actually a theory of language I'd love to read up more about, but basically it has a scale of there must be someone who knows more about this than me, but like on one end you have natural language, which is the language we speak, English and French and whatever else. My wife is from Tamil in India, so she speaks Tamil. And then there's on the other side of the spectrum is what's called structured language, and that's like computer language, or computer programming, mathematics, logic. And it's very structured. It has very defined set of rules. It has a very defined outcome, and like you have to follow those rules. Though those rules are they're like the laws of physics, in that those rules are very defined, and you cannot break those rules under any circumstance. And so, in my respect, my strengths was in the more structured, language programming, which is very logical, very you don't have to remember anything. You could derive everything. You should be able to derive everything from first principles. And other people's strengths would be in unstructured language, like my wife, who could read 1,000,000 miles a minute. And I think it's just important to recognize those differences, in that the way we normally speak is through unstructured language, but not everyone is very good at communicating through that medium.
Of course. Thank you so much, Nicholas. Lois, I think we've got like literally a minute. Is there anything you want to say? A film will be wonderful, Jill said. Jill's watching from London. I think we definitely need something. I mean, we've seen films around something to do with autism. We've seen all that. We've seen other films, but really no one's done nothing around dyslexia. And I think you should go for it. If there's any producers watching right now, listen, Lois, turn your book into a film. It will be a box hit. Is that what they say? A box office hit. That's it. Yeah, wonderful. So thank you for that, Jill. That's amazing. One word, advice for a parent or a child.
Two things. Believe in your child. Believe they're capable. And the second, give them role models. Let them know they're not alone.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for coming on A2I Dyslexia live show. Thank you, Lois. Please, if you haven't got a copy of the book, go and purchase one. Whether you have a child or not, whether you are a parent or not, I'm sure you will know someone who's got dyslexia who you can pass it on to. It is great. It's such an amazing book, and I just couldn't say more than that. So thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you for joining us from New York City. Lois, have a wonderful evening. Thank you. And Nicholas in Oxford, have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. And next week we've got Simon, who will be coming on the show, Simon Phillips, who will be talking about, the title of the show is Dyslexia, I'm a Manager, How Can I Support You? Now, Simon has supported a few people in the workplace, and they have unlocked their full potential from the help he gave them. So next week's show, same time, same place. Would love to see you watch again. Please share this video and thank everybody who's watching. My name's Lizzie Tecci, or Elizabeth Tecci, and I'm from A2I Dyslexia, the founder. And thank you to Dr. Lois Letchford and Lois Letchford. Thank you so much. See you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.